Hello. Hi. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here. I know some people are still settling into seats, but we'll get started so we don't leave too many people online hanging. I know most of you already, but my name is Starling Carter. I work for the Community Church of New York, Unitarian Universalist, organizer of this event. And we're a congregation that's been here in Manhattan for just over 200 years. So we have a very proud tradition of international justice work, and that's one that we are proud to carry forward today. My role at Community Church involves managing our strategy around and our involvement in international justice and advocacy. And I stepped into that role just in the fall, so really not long ago, after a couple of years of managing media and communications. And one of the issues that I knew that I wanted to bring to the forefront of that work was the occupation of Palestine, which has many manifestations, including kind of most publicly over the last couple of years, the genocidal destruction of Gaza. So this interest, and I knew that this is an issue that I wanted to focus on for a couple of reasons, including my own personal history and interests. My master's degree is in Middle East Studies. Thank you, David. My master's degree is in Middle East Studies, and I spent over 5 years living next door to Palestine and Jordan. During that time, I had 2 opportunities to visit Palestine and to see with my own eyes the effects of the occupation and the apartheid on the everyday lives of the Palestinians who were trying to live there. And to see how the systems of supremacy as well inherent to the Israeli state really operate in real life. So it was a very serendipitous coincidence and a really special opportunity that Unitarian Universalists for Justice in the Middle East, or UUJME, organized a Solidarity and Witness delegation for UU religious professionals to Palestine just a few months into my tenure in this role. Speaking to the Unitarians in the audience and others, I know it hasn't always been easy for people in our communities to loudly name the oppression and erasure of Palestinians. And by that, I mean to include displacement, cultural erasure, and genocide because of a variety of factors. And of course, this isn't limited to Unitarianism, but one of the main factors in this hesitation is Zionism, which is not tied to any one religion, but is very much tied to imperialism and supremacy, and is the dominant narrative that most of us living in the United States are inundated with since the days that we're born. I do believe that the tides are turning within our denomination and others, and that it is our responsibility to shepherd that change through our communities. So it is in this context that I've asked these 3 here to speak to us today. They are up-and-coming religious professionals who are either UU themselves or working within UU spaces, and they also happen to be colleagues and friends. Karishma Gottfried, a seminarian at Union Theological Seminary and a lifelong UU who currently serves Community Church as our intern minister. India Wood, who is in the 3rd year of an MDiv MSW, that's Masters of Divinity, Masters of Social Work, dual degree program at Union Theological Seminary and Hunter Silberman School of Social Work, and who previously worked as an organizer for UUJME. And Conor Foley, a graduate of Princeton Theological Seminary, who currently works for Community Church as well as the Director of Community Engagement. All 3 have found their vocations in ministry, and all 3 have chosen to engage deeply with Palestine as part of their spiritual formation. Karishma and India and I took part in the same delegation, which was led by Reverend Megan Henry, who's also with us today, while Conor led their own delegation that began at the end of December. So while many of our experiences overlap, we each come with our own perspectives, and I'm sure we could each speak for hours about our experiences and what we have learned. However, the plan is to stick to around 10 minutes each, after which I will wrap us up with a few remarks and a short video. One thing I want to make very clear before we begin is that Palestinians are the best narrators of their own experiences. So we do not have a Palestinian person speaking on this panel. That's not because we wish in any way to speak over or for them, but because we have already been on the receiving end of so much generosity by Palestinians who were willing to tell their stories, recount painful histories and personal experiences, and entertain our questions over and over. It's now our turn to speak to our communities. So there will be time for questions and answers at the end. And with that, I will turn over the floor to Karishma. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. It's good to be with you this evening. Thank you so much for being here and for joining us online. So my presentation, and I realize I should have figured out how to use this ahead of time, but it works, yes. Thank you so much. Is about two specific experiences I had in Hebron and Suba, and really what I learned from my general time in Palestine, and especially through these two experiences, is the different ways in which the Palestinian experience is divided and how that impacts Palestinians and how it is also used as a tactic of Zionism. So when people talk about Israel and Palestine, Israel, Palestine, Palestine, Israel, Israel, Palestine, it's often framed as one place and one conflict, and that's the whole story. But really, in reality, Palestinian life is fragmented into a number of various legal and geographic categories. And these divisions determine where people live, where they can travel, which laws apply to them, and what rights they have. And I also realized I'm going to go over if I don't set a timer. So I'm setting a timer. And so in this presentation, I'm going to walk through several layers of that fragmentation, from identity documents to territorial divisions, to what it looks like on the ground in places that we visited, like Hebron and an ethnically cleansed, depopulated village called Suba. So to really understand one of the more broader impacts of this division is to understand the Palestinian or the Israeli ID system. And this is one of the most basic ways that Palestinians are divided. So you can see here on the left, there's Jewish Israeli citizens who have Israeli passports and IDs. There's also Palestinian citizens of Israel that legally have the same ID as the Jewish citizens of Israel, but the way that works, similar to in the US, we technically, we all have the same rights under law as American citizens, but how that's applied is very different depending on a lot of different factors. And the people in this Palestinian citizens of Israel, those are Palestinians whose families remained inside Israel's borders that were established after 1948. And then there's also Palestinians living in East Jerusalem. After Israel annexed East Jerusalem in 1967, the Palestinians who were living there were not given Israeli citizenship. They were given a permanent residency, which can be revoked at any time, including if they leave to study abroad or move somewhere else for a bit. They can lose their residency and right to live in East Jerusalem. And then third are Palestinians in the West Bank, who typically hold Palestinian Authority IDs, but as we'll talk about in a sec, many of them live under Israeli military control in a lot of the territory. And then there's also Palestinians in the Gaza Strip who are geographically separated from the Palestinians in the West Bank and East Jerusalem and have lived under blockade for many years, and that's what a lot of people are familiar with due to the ongoing genocide. A lot of people have asked us or seem to think that we visited Gaza when we were in Palestine. You can't as tourists because of the genocide. So we didn't go there, but we were in places that were actually, maybe just a few hours drive away from Gaza. So it really was so striking of how small physically all of this is, but how divided it really can be. So And then the last category is also the millions of Palestinians who are living in the diaspora outside of Palestine, people whose families were displaced during the Nakba of 1948 and the War of 1967, as well as who were expelled or pushed out in the years after that, and they now live all across the world, including in New York City. So before even looking at these maps, Palestinians are already divided into multiple legal categories. And then here within the West Bank itself, there are these maps from Al Jazeera, and the territory is further divided. So when people talk about historical Palestine, they usually mean that entire region between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River. And today that land is generally divided into what we generally know as Israel, East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip. And so in the West Bank, which is this whole little area, that is also divided. It was divided after the Oslo Accords in the 1990s into areas A, B, and C. And area A, which is the green on the left, that's 18% about, is under Palestinian civil and security control and involves most major Palestinian cities. Area B, in the purple, is under Palestinian civil control, so like all the municipal stuff, but under Israeli security control, which means under military occupation. And then area C, which is the blue, and that's about 60% of the West Bank, is under full Israeli civil and military control. And that has been the case since 1967. So what this creates on the map is a patchwork of disconnected Palestinian areas surrounded by territory controlled by Israel. And movement between these places often involves checkpoints, barriers, and permits. And so instead of a single continuous territory, it becomes this fragmented landscape. So for example, to drive from Bethlehem, which is about 5 miles south of Jerusalem, we went there, to Ramallah, which is about 13 miles north of Jerusalem, that should take about half an hour, right? Point A to point B. But for Palestinians who have a Palestinian Authority ID, they can't drive through Jerusalem. First, they have to go on the steep road to the east, pass a checkpoint that can be closed at any time, and eventually get onto a road that's physically divided by a wall in the center, one side for Israeli cars, one side for Palestinian cars. And then only after passing yet another checkpoint do the drivers circle back toward Ramallah from the north. So what should be a 20-mile trip can take anywhere from 1 to 5 hours. And we experienced that when we had guests visiting us to speak, or our guides who lived in various places in Palestine who would often have to leave at 3, 4, 5 a.m. just to get to us, to take into account if borders were closed or if there was traffic, and who sometimes had to arrive late because they were stopped at checkpoints for hours. And if that wasn't enough division, we go into Hebron, which is one of the cities in the West Bank, but also kind of a special case. There's lots of exceptions to the rules. Hebron is in the southern West Bank, and it's home to about 200,000 Palestinians. It's one of the largest cities in the West Bank. And in 1997, the Hebron Protocol divided the city into two sections, H1 and H2. H1 is about 80% of the city and is under Palestinian control. H2 makes up the remaining 20%. There's about 40,000 Palestinians living in the old city, but there's also several Israeli settlements. And there's about, the settlements in Hebron proper house about 400 to 850 settlers. The number's really hard to estimate. And then there's another 8,000 settlers living in the area around. And for those 400 to 800-ish settlers and the 8,000 outside, there's about 2,000 Israeli soldiers who are stationed in this part of the city. Also in the West Bank, Palestinians are subject to Israeli military law, but Israeli settlers living in that same territory are subject to civilian law. So even there's two different sets of legal systems. So these are all just examples of the way that the Palestinian experience is divided. And one way that we saw this as well was on this street in Hebron called Al-Shuhada Street. This was a picture that I took. You can see our little tour guide trip on the side right there. This was in the middle of the day, on like a normal work day. And we did not see, I think, a single Palestinian walking on this street. That's because the street is closed to all Palestinian cars and traffic, and the only people Palestinians allowed on the street are people who live on the street, and they can only get into their houses by walking. There's also been times where the street's been entirely closed and they have to enter through a side alley if they're lucky enough to have a side door, or otherwise, like even through ladders that they have to climb into their own courtyards because they're not allowed on the main street. And this street used to be full. You can see some of these shops that are closed. It used to be full of markets and shops and daily life. And in 1994, an Israeli extremist carried out a massacre at the Cave of Patriarchs nearby, and dozens of Palestinian worshipers were killed. There were protests. The Israeli government and military responded to those protests by shutting down the street. The Hebron Protocol reopened the street, but most of the businesses remained closed. And then during the Second Intifada in 2000, the street was closed again. So there's all of these rules and these uncertainties, and so obviously, shops and commercial businesses cannot thrive in this area where they're allowed basically no traffic or people coming by. Like I said, we didn't see a single Palestinian walking down the street, except for our tour guide. But we did see many Israeli soldiers in full military gear with the big guns observing us and watching us from watchtowers and watch points. And so we tried to take some photos of it, but we were generally told, don't even try to take a photo because they're, watching us. The most interesting part of this for me, though, was this sign, the closed shops on King David Street. This was the sign that was written in Hebrew and English, and it describes, it refers to the street not with the Arabic Al-Shahada street name, but as King David Street, and describes the closures because of Arab jihadists, again, not using the word Palestinian at all, we'll see that. And it emphasizes a biblical and Israeli historical connection to the land while describing Palestinian resistance through the language of terrorism. And what's missing here is the story of the Palestinian residents who lived and worked and ran businesses here. So these signs are not just informational, but it's a way of shaping how visitors understand the history. And I'm out of time. So very briefly, I will also talk about the second place we went, but that is a view from Suba, which is a place that we visited in historical Palestine, so what is now known as Israel. And this place really shows what the vision is, what happens when these tactics of fragmentation work. We've seen this in Gaza, right? We've seen this blockade, keeping people in this one place, not allowing them to leave, not allowing them to be connected, committing a genocide, and all for the new Gaza. This is a slideshow from the Board of Peace that Jared Kushner is on, and their plan to make a new Gaza and a Gaza development plan. There was a sign we saw in Jerusalem, "Make Gaza Jewish again." It's not subtle. And when we look at these signs, we see this end goal. It's also not just subtle, but it's not a new thing. This has happened before. This is the town of Suba. You can see there's a lot of cacti here. That is something we learned on this tour, that Palestinian villages and villagers often used cacti as kind of natural borders and fences for their homes. And so when you look around, you can see where the cacti have grown. You can see where the borders of someone's house once were. And that's a way you can see throughout Palestine. When you see the cacti, this used to be a Palestinian village. You can also see the ruins of their stone houses. This was somebody's kitchen. We walked right inside where a woman who used to bake bread for her entire village, and these homes were completely destroyed. You can also see here's the ruins, and then in the background on these other hills is the Israeli settlements. Suba is the name of the Palestinian town. It also, the Israeli settlement of Sova sits on the land near the former village. So sometimes the settlers would move directly into the homes that have been cleared out and people have been expelled from, and sometimes they would destroy the villages completely and build a new one. This place now is a national park, Sova National Park. This is what the sign says in English. I highlighted a couple things that were interesting. Again, Arab village that was conquered in 1948, talking about the biblical connections, the Crusaders, this ancient settlement, but really ignoring the history and truth of this place that was a place where people lived until 1948. People who were living in this village that has been completely destroyed, turned into this national park, are still alive. The children who grew up in this village are still alive. If they are lucky enough to be alive, many of them are in refugee camps or in other places in Palestine or in the rest of the diaspora. But this is the impact is, you can see these cacti, but it's a park. So when we look at places like Hebron or the routes between Palestinian cities or villages like Suba, we can see that division isn't only happening on maps, right? This is happening through legal systems, through infrastructure, and even through the way that the landscapes and histories are preserved and presented. But still, traces of the Palestinian people remain, not just in ruins and in cacti, but also in the stories and memories and lives of the people who were and still are here. So with that context in mind, as we continue to share just a small part of what we learned from our time in Palestine, I will pass it over to our next presenter, India Wood.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to advance through the rest. Okay, amazing. Oh, spoiler. Okay, hi. In the summer of 2008, I was 12 years old, and my family went to Israel. Here we are. This is my whole family and also my grandparents. I grew up attending a UU congregation outside Boston, but my mother's side of the family is Jewish, and I have always identified as culturally Jewish. I'm a Jew-U, if you will. We traveled for a family trip to Israel, and it culminated in my cousin's bar mitzvah, and we had the bar mitzvah in the old city and watched the sunset from the top of a hill. It was very beautiful. And we did a lot of classic Jewish American tourism activities while we were in Israel. We participated in an archaeological project, sifting through soil to find ancient artifacts. We went ziplining and we rode ATVs, and we floated in the Dead Sea. We even spent an afternoon in the occupied West Bank one of the days. So here are some images from the trip. Here's my family in the old city. Here's the tour bus that we were on. We had an armed guard with us at all times. Here are three of the members of the family peeing on Palestinian land in the West Bank. And here's me and my mom and my grandma. So at the time, all of this seemed completely normal. It was a fun family vacation. I was 12 years old. And I didn't have any concept of what Palestine was or that was where I was. But all of that changed, a lot of it when I went to college and for the first time learned about Palestine and Palestinian liberation. It changed even more after college when I learned about organizations like If Not Now and Jewish Voice for Peace. And I started working with and organizing with a lot of Jews who actively identified as anti-Zionist. But it really changed for me after October 7th and the siege that happened in Gaza thereafter. I could talk for a long time about this journey to learning more and more about Palestine and becoming a staunch Jewish UU advocate for Palestine, but that's not what I want to talk to you all about today. I want to focus today on my return to Jerusalem this past January, which was almost 20 years after this trip. So returning to Jerusalem hardly felt like a return, as I'm sure you might have assumed. I was arriving at the same place with the intention to have an entirely different experience. Even as I recognized a lot of the sites that I had already been to, there was nothing that felt familiar about those sites. about this place that I had previously been to, which was supposed to be my Jewish homeland, as I was told before. So while we were in Palestine for 2 weeks on our EU delegation, we met with a handful of Palestinian folks, leaders and activists every single day, like a really packed itinerary. We met with politicians, community organizers, theologians, artists, small business owners, religious leaders, directors of nonprofits, so many people. But the most powerful meetings I think that we had were with everyday Palestinian people who had become de facto activists, simply by being Palestinian people who refused to be forced out of their homes. And that is exactly who Eid Solomon Hathlin is. He lives in Khair, a Palestinian village within Masafer Yatta, which is a place that a lot of people know from No Other Land. And it's near the city of Hebron, which Karishma spoke about. And this village has become almost completely engulfed by the Israeli settlement of Carmel. So Karishma already spoke a little bit about this. This village, Khair, is within Area C. And Area C has about 61% of the Palestinian population within it. So I'll just skip over the information I had for this. But essentially, we were sitting in this small village, and it was really cold that day. January in Israel, also cold. And we were drinking Arabic coffee out of these teeny tiny cups in this shelter, and we were listening to Eid speak about what it looks like every day to live in Khair. Eid told us about his father, who was killed in 2022 after being run over by an Israeli police vehicle, and no one was charged or convicted for his murder. Then he told us that this past summer, his cousin, who is a well-known peace activist, was killed also, murdered by an Israeli settler, shot to death. He spoke the name of his cousin, and a rush of familiarity came over me. Auda Hathlin. Auda's murder last summer had rocked my community back in Somerville, Massachusetts, where I moved from to New York City, where many people I know used to organize with Auda and loved Auda very deeply. One friend in particular, Raviv, worked very closely with Auda. They had actually lived there in Masafer Yatta for many months doing protective presence work, which is where a lot of people internationally from the US come to villages like Khair to witness and de-escalate violence committed against Palestinians by Israeli settlers and the IDF. So after Eid finished speaking, we walked around the village together. You can see some images here. You can see the newer blockade that is being formed by Israeli settlers, made out of barbed wire and rocks, and you can see the Israeli flag. You can also see in the distance there a menorah. Here you can see the settlement of Carmel and that gate over there. That was the gate and road that led to the settlement that goes directly through the village. You can also see in the background of this image these caravan temporary shelters in the back. Those are all newer, and they are all inhabited by Israeli settlers who are trying to encroach on the village. These are some children who are playing on a recently downed tree. We were there with a lot of rain and wind while we were visiting. And this is a picture of Auda that they had up in the village. This other image is the site of Auda's murder. Here's the mural that they made for Auda. It says, standing here, permanent here, eternal here. And we have one goal, one, to be. So the settler that murdered Auda had actually been sanctioned by the Biden administration, and that sanction was lifted by the Trump administration, and he has still not been charged with the murder. Often when people travel to new places, they do so with the intention of making a place more familiar to them. They want to come to a place and experience a new culture and eat the food and connect with the people who live there, which was also my intention when I came to Palestine. And I wanted so much to feel this familiarity too, but so much of my experience was one of feeling completely overwhelmed in so many moments. Overwhelmed by grief, by how much hospitality was being shown to all of us when we visited. They didn't know us, but they welcomed us into their homes, their villages. They made us feel so much like we belonged. But most of all, I was feeling deeply alienated and completely unfamiliar with how any of this violence that we were witnessing could be justified in the name of Judaism, in the name of a tradition that I love. How could the hundreds of people who live every day in Carmel justify their presence there and do it under the guise of the shared religion that we had, a religion I understand to be against domination and against injustice? Nothing about that felt familiar to me. Before we left the village for the day, I found Eid, and I said to him, "I think that we share a friend. Do you know Raviv?" And as soon as I said Raviv's name, Eid's face completely lit up. He was like, "You know Raviv. Raviv is such a good friend to us here." And immediately I felt such a deep connection to him. Seeing his face upon mentioning Raviv's name really reminded me of exactly the type of person that Raviv is and exactly how special Raviv is. They're dedicated, talented, generous, and hilarious. Raviv loves people very fiercely and loved Auda and his two very small children so much. I told Eid that Raviv was completely gutted by the loss of Auda, and he nodded and said that they all were. I spoke to another young man who lived there, and he also deeply loved Raviv and told me to send a selfie. Right before getting back on our bus, I spoke to the two current American college students who were doing protective presence work in the village. I was asking both of them where they were from and what brought them there, and one of them told me that he was from outside Boston. And of course I asked him, where'd you go to high school? And he said, a small Jewish day school. I was like, which one? And he said, Gann Academy. And I was like, oh my God, my ex-boyfriend and my mentor, Layla, both work there. And he was like, you dated Mr. Metcalf? And we both really freaked out. And it was so sweet. And just really laughed at the absurdity of it all, about how small the world is, all these things. So here is a picture of me and Eid, and a picture of me with the two protective presence folks, and also the young man who knows Raviv. And Karishma, sorry. So true. This day was just one moment of an incredible and completely transformative trip. But it was also one of the first moments of many where I finally felt a deep familiarity with this place that felt so completely unfamiliar and disconnected from the lie that Zionism tells American Jews about American Jewish people about what Israel is supposed to be. I came to Palestine with the intention of seeing for myself just how interdependent all of us are. My struggle as an American fighting fascism and the militarization of ICE cannot be disentangled from the fight for Palestinian liberation. If there's anything I want you to take away from this story, it's not like a small world story. It's that we're all connected intimately, and that we have to dismantle this idea that what's happening in Palestine, in Iran, and in the US with ICE and deportation, we have to fight the idea that all these things are separate somehow. There's no such thing as a single issue in times like these. ICE and American police officers, as many of you know, are often trained by the IDF. And the war in Iran has everything to do with Israel and empire and all of these things. And I know that my Jewish UU identity is one that instructs me to oppose the occupation with all of my being. In his new book, Jewish author Peter Beinart writes, "The Bible considers states very perilous things. They can easily become instruments of oppression. In Jewish tradition, states have no inherent value. States are not created in the image of God. Human beings are." Susanna Heschel, daughter of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, writes, "What I learned from my father is that the land itself is not holy, not to be worshipped, and not to die for. Rather, the land is a site for holiness to be created." So after returning to Palestine after my first trip when I was 12, I can certainly tell you that this place is certainly the Holy Land. Not because I believe that certain people have some God-given claim to that land, but because the Palestinian people I met there are creating holiness around them through their unwavering work for justice and liberation. And the holiest work that we can do in our lives and in our work together is remember that we are interdependent. We're all connected to each other, and our survival relies on solidarity. Thanks, you guys.
Front. Sorry, I just gotta find my notes real quick. Here we go. All right. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. It's really, really great to be in conversation with you and to get the opportunity to share all of the things that we were given, that we were tasked with carrying back here and sharing with you all. I'm also really glad and grateful to hear from my colleagues because I didn't go on that trip. And not all the trips are the same. They're often very different. I've gone on a couple in the past couple of years, and both the ones I went on were really different. Theirs were different, and what I have to talk about is, I hope, complementary. I want to talk about cultural resistance and narrative war in Palestine. I want to think about how the brutalities that we saw, the violences of colonialism, occupation, ethnic cleansing, and genocide, are the enfleshment of an ideology, driven by a story that the powerful have been able to tell, written with the blood of Palestinians, but which has been resisted by the steadfastness of a people who've held on to their own story, a truer story, one rooted in the land, one themed by welcome and hospitality rather than supremacy and death. And each of these vignettes just gestures towards the whole of Palestinian culture, artistry, and storytelling, each as a form of resistance to colonialism and genocide. So the first place we went to is the Aida refugee camp, which has been a temporary home for multiple generations of Palestinians displaced in the Nakba, or the founding of Israel. And the key at the entrance, over the entrance, is a symbol of the hope to return home. It's a symbol that evokes the still unfolding story of Zionism and signals the counter-struggle for liberation, the Palestinian hope that a new and different story might yet be told. In Aida, we were taught how to cook a traditional Palestinian meal by a group of women who spend most of their time taking care of children with severe disabilities. And the meal was more than just a way of funding their work with those kids. It was a way of telling the story of Palestine. The recipe captured in itself centuries of Palestinians making and sharing it. It rooted them in the land that bore the elements of this recipe, that nourished the people who created with those ingredients in the experimentation of 100 generations. The food extended time beyond the boundaries of colonial temporality, connecting them to ancestors down through centuries. And while we were there, we encountered some folks who pointed out where they were from on a mural, folks who were from places like Suba. They just sort of lined up and walked over to the mural and pointed out the general vicinity of where they were from. They wanted us to know that they were refugees. They were from somewhere, and they had a home to return to. That they were living archives, depositories of human histories that wouldn't die, no matter how violent their colonizer and its patron state. They made jewelry out of spent munitions that had been used against them, munitions manufactured in Pennsylvania. You can see on the right, and they turned it into earrings and necklaces and all kinds of beautiful things, alchemizing their pain and that violence into something beautiful. We went to the Duban dance studio, where a young dancer, community organizer, and archivist told the story of the dabke, the traditional dance made up of agricultural movement, stylizing the rhythms of farm life, shepherding, and the olive harvest. And he explained how that dance, that centuries-old dance, changed through encounter with Zionism. The hand reaching up for the pomegranate turned into a hand clenching the rock that would be thrown at the colonizer. The clothing and jewelry and basket weaving that made up his collection held the loving, creative intention of an identity that stretched long past 1948. As we arrived at the Siraj Storytelling Library, the women who run it kindly greeted us and informed us that we may need to move quickly. 300 Israeli soldiers had been through just that morning, and we may need to run. A Marine Corps veteran who was with us said that the thing we were smelling in the air was gunpowder. But unshaken, these women began to tell dramatized stories, traditional folk tales accompanied by music. In the library, the stone and wood that held the books, the flesh and blood that held the tales passed down at bedtime and around a communal fire. The library was a counter-narrative against the story that erases Palestinian presence, humanity, and creativity. It held the wisdom of the land and the people in narrative form. We also met with Ahmed from the Educational Bookshop in Jerusalem. And he showed us his shop, which periodically gets raided by the police, the Israeli police. They seize any books that they believe to be a danger to the Israeli state, and they fine and jail him quite frequently. And he's not running some political propaganda shop. It's not some front for a political party. It's just the stuff you would find in Barnes & Noble. But the quivering fear of the state is the way its story might come undone if the counter-narrative of Palestinian life, cultural production, literary production, intellectual struggle is allowed any voice. So they must crush it. Body and soul, they must exterminate the Palestinian story. Sabeel, too, as an ecumenical center for liberation theology, this is the group who took us on this trip. These were our guides. They're telling an indigenous story, too. As Christians who have been worshiping in the land since it gave birth to Jesus, they see through the narrow supremacy of the colonizer's narrative. They believe in a land that belongs to everyone, to be shared by all its inhabitants, to be honored by all the traditions whose roots trace back to this sacred place. They also took us to meet with Father David Neuhaus, a Jewish child of Holocaust survivors who fled to South Africa. He and our Palestinian guide, Omar, went back and forth during one of our discussions. Omar believes in international law as a guide. He advocates for 2 states, for the right for Palestinian refugees to return home. Father David doesn't believe that international law has any utility, especially after what we've seen in Gaza. He believes in one democratic state, representing all people. Neither one believes in Zionism, which establishes an ethno-religious state on the lived-in homeland of another people, to their exclusion, subordination, torture, and death. So in different ways, through a range of channels, the people we met were trying to tell a story where all shared the land, where even the settler is indigenized by abandoning their exogenous mythology and embracing the autochthonous patterns of native life. We also saw its opposite. We saw what the narrative engine of Zionism produced, the culture it created, the people who believed themselves to be living inside it, who violently bent the shape of reality, the contours of geography, and the unwilling bodies of the people who would not submit to it. We saw homes spangled in Israeli flags, stolen from Palestinians with bars and cameras and a military retinue protecting their theft. We saw the checkpoints that choke all movement and force human beings through humiliating searches and degrading queues like cattle in a cage. We saw the roving bands of soldiers harassing and detaining the locals. And it was all too familiar. It was a common story, the one of European colonialism, racialized violence, and genocidal impulses. The belief that one people is providentially ordained to inherit what others have made. The most striking of all revelations was how familiar all this was. It was my own story, the story of my country, my settlerness, my access to racist state violence, my desire to find belonging in a place that I've stolen from another. But in spite of it all, Palestine remains. The welcome remains. The invitation to come and enjoy the culture, food, and stories of Palestine, that invitation remains even as I'm their oppressor. And they said this explicitly. They said, "We know you're our oppressor, and we still welcome you." So for all of us, whatever our past, the future is open. The next chapter is ours to write. What we must struggle toward is putting the pen in the hands of Palestinians. Let them write their story. It'll be far more beautiful than any of the horror written by the West. Let the storytellers of Palestine plant and grow and harvest and dance and cook and eat and sing and play and write and create, and let them tell the story of liberation. And may we all find ourselves in it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. We've heard a lot in a relatively short time, and it's been striking me throughout all of these presentations how much more, one of my colleagues says something and it sparks a thought or a memory, and I want to almost add on or interject, and yet to do that would keep you all here for 10 days. And for some perspective, I would say the experience of being on one of these delegations for 10 days is a lot like having multiple semesters of college classes on this conflict packed into that short time, but told by the people who are actually living it and actually experiencing it. And so it's incredibly powerful, and there's so much that remains to be expressed. But this was, I think, such a helpful dip into the water of what we all experienced in our different and shared perspectives. We will be opening up to questions in a few minutes, so please hold on to anything that you are wondering about or want to go deeper on. First, I wanted to show a video, and I'm going to set up that video a little bit. It's about one individual experience, and I think connecting sometimes to an individual story in the sea of stories just helps bring it home to our empathy, our nervous system in a way. And I will give you a fair warning that when we saw this video, when we were in the depopulated village of Suba, I think at least almost everyone in our group had tears in their eyes by the end, so sorry in advance. It's the least we can do. So the background on this video is that it was shown to us by a young man named Tariq Bakri. He is Palestinian citizen of Israel, I believe. He runs a project called We Were and Still Are Here, where he receives images and information from Palestinians living all over the world, some of them in the West Bank, some in the diaspora, who maybe they've been hearing for generations a story about their family home that they've never been able to visit themselves, or that they haven't seen since they were a child, and they've always wondered what happened to it. And so he takes as his task to find, sometimes on just the vaguest of descriptions, or a photo that shows one column of the entrance, he hunts down these places and he visits them and he photographs them, and he tries to, on many occasions, initiate conversation with the people who are living there, many of whom are descendants of the Jewish families that were given these houses, often with the belongings, the valuables, even the dinner plates on the table of the families who were just forced at gunpoint to evacuate. He did share that he had never quite gotten a positive response when he did make contact. So whenever possible, he also brings Palestinian people, again, from all over the world, if they have the right papers. Sometimes, somebody who might be a second-generation Palestinian American might actually be able to get over the borders of Israel, and he takes them to the site of their ancestral home. And he has many amazing stories. Oh, again, I do have a slide. So this is a shot from his website. You can see he also does photography, where he's extremely skilled at getting the exact same angle on some of these photos. And I really encourage you to go visit his website, because there are just countless very powerful stories and examples of what things were in 1948 and where they still are today. So Tarek took us to a couple of places. One of them is, somewhere here. A slide may have gone missing, but one of them was the depopulated village of Suba that Karishma mentioned. And in that village, he is the one who told us about the cacti. And he showed us a video. He told us the story of a woman named Halima, who I believe was the aunt of one of his friends, who had grown up in a village very like Suba. It's called Ramle. And she was 15 years old when the Nakba happened in 1948. And when we say the Nakba, just to put in context, it's tens of thousands or more Palestinians being forced to leave their homes at gunpoint, or just being murdered on the spot. So massive ethnic cleansing. Just to add some context to that word, which is decontextualized. So she grew up the first 15 years of her life in this pretty idyllic, beautiful, rural stone village. And for the rest of her life, over 75 years, she lived in an overcrowded refugee camp on the other side of the wall in the West Bank called El Jalazon. And she never stopped dreaming of her village. Tarek was able to pull off something amazing, which is that he brought Halima and two of her friends, who are all, I believe, in their early 90s at this point. He, with his Israeli license plate, was able to pick them up and bring them over that border for the first time in 75 years. Just taking a second to let that sink in. He saw how they changed physically on just being reunited with this homeland. And he documented it in a very beautiful video, which I will show you now. And then we will open up to questions, and at the end have a couple of opportunities and calls to action to share. Okay, let's see if this is gonna work. Dylan and David, is it possible to dim the lights also?
كيفك يما شو اخبارك؟
الحمد لله
الله
يا
يسعدك.
يما. والله مبسوطين احنا عفيتنا بالها متسهلين. يا عبد القادر يوم النوماتي وزعوا الخبر في الطيارات. يا عبد القادر يوم النساشات يا جلال انا لك عايات.
يما هي احنا
طيب هاي
يما احنا قدامنا مفرق بيت نبالة.
هاي مفرق بيت نبالة.
هاي هون الكامب كان مفرق نبالة.
ايه
مفرق نبالات.
نبالات.
هلا راح نشوف المدرسة.
تبني جواد الصراحة.
هاي البلد.
هاي هون اصلا.
وين دارك؟ وينها؟
وين؟ وين بالضبط وين؟ انت قعدتي على البير تبعنا.
انا قعدت عبيرنا
عبير
عبيرنا
بيرنا.
هذا بير افتشع من كله. إلنا ولا دور عم نجيب ولا عم نشني. بير جودي ذكرها. أنا كو. أنا كو. بير جودي. وبير نور مدام علي.
بعرف معروف.
يا زيتونتنا يا زيتونتنا انت غالية علينا وانت حياتنا.
Just to add some context, which I realize isn't actually explained in the video, but was explained very well by Tarek, is that on this trip, Tarek learned from Halima that she had never seen the sea. And so he said, let's go there right now. And I think like this video feels so powerful to me because it's just that you feel really the brutality of taking people away from this life-giving land and water, and just the brutality of taking a 15-year-old girl and forcing her to live her life in a a cage, essentially, where she's never had the opportunity to see a sea where she's from a country with a long coastline. And it just that kind of emotional resonance of that, the brutality and the grief, I think, is something worth sitting with. Whew, we made it. I would love to take any questions that you have. I don't think we necessarily need to use the mic since we're in a pretty cozy space, but maybe if folks want to say their question, and then I can repeat it into the mic for the people who are online. That would be a good way to go. Anyone? Maybe we just covered everything so thoroughly. You have no possible questions. Yes, please.
Okay, this is not a profound question. On Insta, I saw information about the Aida soccer pitch and that Israel wanted to tear it down. Whatever happened? I hope they didn't.
Yes, so that was, did somebody else want? I'll say that was actually, so the question, you're right. The question is about the Aida refugee camp soccer pitch, because it's actually just before we were there, they had received demolition orders from the Israeli authorities to demolish the soccer field where the kids of the refugee camp play. And in this case, there was pretty significant international outcry, and I think even FIFA and some other international soccer federations, forgive my ignorance on those terms, but as well as people like, yes, Miss Rachel, got involved, and actually that kind of pressure did stop, or let's say stay, the demolition. And that's something that we actually heard on a number of occasions from many different people. People would say, listen, we know that it's not perfect. We don't, think this is going to end the occupation now, but maybe the only reason we still have our houses is because a bunch of Americans wrote to their senators, and those senators wrote a letter to Netanyahu saying, hey, we're watching you, don't demolish this neighborhood. And so even if it gives us a few extra months in our homes, sometimes international pressure is the only thing that's, in saying we're watching, is the only thing that keeps that from happening. And sorry to go long, but actually a few weeks after we returned, we saw news that the same thing was happening to the soccer field in El-Khair, which India talked about, and which we have photos you can see. It's right next to the basketball court where Oda Hathaline was murdered, and they had just finished it, put the grass down, and they got a stop work order, which is often a precursor to a demolition order. So it's it's a moving target, but there's a target, and our pressure does do something. And I think that was a really important takeaway for me.
I might just add something to that. Is this, check. We went to the village of Silwan as well, which is experiencing, the same things. It's more urban. It's just outside of Jerusalem, so it's not the same kind of like just demolishing an entire village, but it's a slow drip kind of ethnic cleansing. And we went, and what makes me think of it is the soccer pitch and the eyes. So there was a soccer pitch with a bunch of kids playing on it, and it was so distinctive in my mind because they're playing in the midst of rubble. And again, it's like a tightly packed urban context, but these kids are running around playing with like these houses demolished all around them. And as we were walking by them, our guide was like calling out to the people in those homes that had been destroyed. They're like, oh yeah, I think so-and-so, he's in there, and like calls them out. Because like, yeah, where else would you go? Like, that's your house. And once they destroy your house, you literally have nowhere to go, so you're just living in the rubble. And the kids are playing their soccer pitch, perhaps not long for this world. But above, it's kind of like a Brazilian favela kind of thing. Like up this hill, there's all these houses looking down, and there are these massive murals all across all the houses with eyes of like different figures, like George Floyd's eyes are up there, right? And it's to say that we're watching. The international community is watching. And even if that isn't solving the problem, it does seem to curtail it and allow folks to survive for a little bit longer.
I've included the website for Eyewitness Silwan, which is an organization that is working there to bring attention to those evictions and stealing of homes there. So I definitely encourage you to go there.
First of all, thank you very much, all of you. It's really encouraging for me as an older activist who's been dealing with the Palestinian issue for many years to see you all out there. It's just, I have goosebumps just talking to you, so thank you. You know, in my particular area, I'm from Southern California and Ventura. We've had a very active group, Venturans for a Just Palestine, for many years. And what my experience is, or our group's experience is, and I mean, I'm very aware that the international community is involved, and that's uplifting the justice that needs to be done in this horrible genocide. But what we see from our own congressional members who we've met with a number of times is that now they're coming out, you know, they're very much for supporting ICE, you know, anti-ICE, and they're very much in Democratic folks that are very much in opposition to what's going on in Iran. But they have been staunch advocates of U.S. policy in Palestine. I mean, I'm sure they're all bought off by AIPAC, but we can't see any change. I mean, I just read this little thing, and practically as I was going out to catch the plane to get here, you know, from our congressman, you know, and so I would like your feedback on anything you can say about possibly influencing Congress at all. I mean, if you have any brilliant ideas or you have a larger perspective, you know, nationally, I would just like to hear from you. Thank you.
Oh, you can summarize.
Okay, I'm just going to summarize the question, which is very real. The question is about, you know, when you look at a lot of our Democratic lawmakers, they might be very staunchly anti-ICE crackdowns, anti-war, but just have been unwavering on their support for Israel and for U.S. policy in supporting Israel unconditionally. And so how do we deal with that? And is there a strategy for getting to them? I think it looks like Karishma has something to say.
I have nothing brilliant, no brilliant strategies. If I had those, I'd probably be leading some nonprofit right now. But I think the two things there are the propaganda is very strong. The stories that we told today, most of the people around us don't know those stories. You might not have known those stories before coming here, or even within, the last 2-3 years. And the propaganda machine is very good. I mean, I showed you those signs, right? Those are the printed signs. Those are the signs people see. There were so many signs and things, and even when I was trying to do some research to back up my numbers and the facts and things that we were told, but trying to find some resources to, be well bolstered against any arguments that might come with the things that I shared. And I read so many articles from the other side of things that conveniently left out entire massacres, or were phrased in a way that implied that something was because of the Palestinians, but actually it wasn't. And of course they only said Arab and not Palestinian, because they never say the word Palestinian. And there's all these ways, and I mean, we see this in our country too. We see the ways that narratives are used, we see the way that misinformation is used, that AI is used, and those are only getting stronger. And so one thing that we can do is continue to educate ourselves and the people around us, and to call out misinformation and propaganda when we see it, and try to provide resources that are accurate. And then the other part, I think, is also what Starling was saying about the advocacy and focusing on the things that might seem small but have such a real impact in people's lives. I don't think we're going to get an outpouring of national politicians saying that they're anti-Zionists or to free Palestine. That's just not going to happen. But what we can do, I mean, we'd love that. But what we can do, right, is advocate on the specific issues. I mean, you can, even the people who are anti-ICE, you say, right, okay, you're anti-ICE, you're anti-this. There's a lot of things that are very connected to what's happening in the US. The police brutality and military brutality, the destruction of children's schools and soccer camps, the things that are clearly against international law. There's all of these things that, again, might seem small and not systemic, and that is true, and we need to work for systemic change. But also, keeping someone in their house for another 6 months is no small thing.
Yeah, I would only add to that I mean, I think the strategy, you can only talk to a wall so many times. At some point, there has to be a real threat to their ability to be reelected. And I think, I wonder, yeah, right now there's a battle in my congressional district. I live in Dan Goldman's district, and yeah. So that's been interesting to watch. Yes, go Brad. And I saw an Instagram post yesterday. There's, people who are exposing Dan Goldman's both wife and I think campaign finance advisor on some very horrifically anti-Palestinian, pro-genocidal rhetoric tweets. And so just really amplifying that this is not an issue that is going away for us, and we actually do have alternatives, and we will be putting a lot of energy behind them. Sometimes that's the only language that they're going to speak. I wish there was an incredibly wealthy pro-Palestine lobby. If anyone wants to get on that, I think that would be a great thing to do with, Yes.
The best thing that we did for Palestine in the recent past was to elect Zoran Mamdani, mayor of New York City, which is leading to a surge of other anti-AIPAC candidates, not just in District 10 in Brooklyn, but all over the country, I think. And it's slow, but it's happening, and they're getting more and more popular.
Right.
And, focusing on issues of what people need here, but also being progressive as to international affairs. I hate the word foreign.
Yes, I think just to rephrase it for those online, just pointing out the massive success of the Mamdani campaign in New York as an example that these are not fringe policies, these are successful policies, especially when combined with such intentional care for the local community, that these are entwined topics and policies, that's hopefully inspiring a wave of like-minded candidates. Yes, was there a question next to you?
There have been many congressional districts where there have been campaigns that have made an AIPAC endorsement toxic in some Democratic districts. Even in the district where an AIPAC candidate survived, they went away from AIPAC and specifically denounced their policy, but it was so close that was the only way to survive, by denouncing AIPAC.
Right. So by making the AIPAC association toxic, that's one of the ways that we can just don't stop bringing it up. And really kind of put the pressure on. Every time there's a meet and greet, you show up and say, why are you still taking money from people who are actively supporting genocide over and over, and we just make it as bad a look as possible, where people feel like it's actually in my best interest to distance myself. Okay, any other questions? Blue shirt. Hi.
I'd love to hear a little bit about how you all are thinking as faith leaders of using your faith in this, like, I guess kind of the same way, but the opposite way that so many people have twisted Christian and Jewish faith traditions to support Zionism. How is your UU approach able to kind of overcome that?
The question is about, for these up-and-coming faith leaders, how do you use your faith and faith communities to counteract the twisting of religious narratives in favor of Zionism? Who wants to start?
That's a really great question. Thank you. Yeah, I basically only preach about this right now. I'm not currently connected to a specific congregation, but I preach all over the area. And if I've been told by the minister of the congregation that they aren't talking about this, I try to slip in a little something, or I try to slip in how this is connected to like larger things. Like I preached about ICE last weekend, and I connected it to this just a little bit as a treat. So I think one thing is just to not stop talking about it, and also not stop talking about how it's related to so many things. Unitarian Universalists have a lot of leeway. We have freedom of pulpit. We can say whatever we want from the pulpit, kind of. And also people have freedom of the pew, right? Like they can vote with like if they come to your sermons or not. So we do have to be responsible to that dynamic. And like we have so much freedom in what we can and should say as faith leaders from the pulpit. I think, of course, like uniquely I'm positioned as someone who was raised Jewish as well as Unitarian Universalist to speak to this, and especially to congregations who are struggling with Jewish community members within the UU congregation who are really struggling with their relationship to Zionism. And that's really hard. Like I think it's important for UU congregations to really grapple with that. And I think a lot of UU congregations right now are choosing to kind of sit in a negative piece around it, like kind of just like a deep tension around it. I think like the thing that I think is most important is to not do that, is to really commit to, these are going to be uncomfortable conversations. How can we address them in the most loving and most compassionate and most community-minded way, while also knowing that our belief in like interconnectedness, in solidarity, in love at the center, like all of these deep values within Unitarian Universalism, those are so deeply anti-genocide. They're so deeply anti-imperialist. Like, it's so important that we stand up, and so many times Unitarian Universalists throughout history have failed to do that, the Vietnam War being a huge one. We did not take a strong stand around this. Many congregations did, but as an association, wasn't as strong as it should have been. And we can't keep failing.
I could speak to that a little bit from my Christian background. I'm super new to UU spaces. I've been at community church for like 5 months. So I'm figuring out what the theological resources of this tradition offer. But I think it's interesting to think about Christianity and Christian Zionism and like that particular block, which of course is the most powerful block that's supporting the state of Israel and everything that's happening, right? The anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, right, make no sense in the context of Christian hegemony, right? So it's like we are doing everything we're doing because there are Christians in control of the levers of government, and they want to see this. And so I grew up extremely Zionist. My parents would go to Israel, come back with IDF T-shirts for me to wear, right? Like super, super into it. I won't go into like the details of my whole personal process of coming out of that, but I'll just say I've been seeing how Christians have been reshaping their thinking around Palestine, around Israel, around Zionism for these last couple of years, in ways that are really worrying too, right? Like there's that trajectory, which is really scary, and then there's also ways that certain voices have broken through to the Christian constituency, right? Like. I'm blanking on his name. The guy from Bethlehem? Yeah, Munther Isaac. Like his sermon, Christ in the Rubble, breaking through to the evangelical mainstream. and folks beginning to think, right, outside of their political commitments to this Jesus figure and to this tradition that exists in the land that they have some claim to, that they've been very happy to let be destroyed by colonialism, right? I mean, if before Israel was founded, there were about 10% Christians in the Holy Land, there's now nearly zero. It's a very, very tiny amount of folks. And so if you can kind of play on that with these folks, as I've done with my family, of like, don't you care about the gospel, right? Don't you care that these churches exist and that they describe themselves as the living stones, right? As not like these mausoleums to some ancient reality, but as people who are carrying this tradition forward. Don't you care about your brothers and sisters in Christ? And that's like really working pretty well in certain spaces. And we're seeing the attrition. We're seeing the Zionist narratives just sort of crumble under scrutiny. And I think there are many, many theological resources. I spent so much time thinking about this right now that I could keep going, but I'll just say I think there's a lot of good work to do from the religious perspective.
Just briefly, as the UU without any hyphen here, I don't have any other faith traditions to draw on, but I think everything that India said about our values being against genocide, bringing it back to our values. We value love, we value justice, we value interdependence, we value equity. Those are inherent to Palestinian liberation. Those are inherent to being against genocide. So we are called as Unitarian Universalists to be a part of the movement for Palestinian liberation.
Can I say one more thing real quick?
Fine.
Which I don't mean to blow up your spot, Rabbi Andy, but Rabbi Andy is the executive director of the American Council for Judaism. And I think creating these connections between like progressive religious formations that have these politics of totalizing liberation at their heart is also going to be really crucial moving forward.
Okay, I'm going to take the last question right there. Thank you.
I, as an immigrant brown person, just the more I learn, the more I understand that when it comes to documenting the history of the genocide, when I grew up learning about the genocide that happened in my country, or just now, it all just feels in binary, but when we talk about people who want Palestinian liberation, it goes past cis people, it goes past straight people, New York City legends, Marsha P. Johnson, Sylvia Rivera, they all, and they are my ancestors, and they talked about Palestinian liberation. So I would be curious if, in your trip, if you encountered any queer individuals who shared their stories, or in sharing resources, if you could let us know how we can connect with more queer people there. I would love to know more, but also just want to know your take on it. Thank you.
So to summarize the question, recognizing that the support for Palestinian liberation has become an intersectional issue across many different identities, including queer identities. With that in mind, did we encounter people who presented themselves to us as queer, or do we have resources for connecting with Palestinians who are queer? And I would say, just to start us off, only one speaker on our delegation talked about this directly, and I would say what I have heard from many queer Palestinians, including, I would say, some very close friends of mine that I hope would support me speaking on their behalf, is that Israel has engaged in quite a lot of pinkwashing of their genocidal activities against Palestinians under the guise of liberation, and that they're the only place in the Middle East where it's safe to be openly gay or queer. And I think most Palestinian people would say, well, it's actually not safe to be any Palestinian when you're bombing us. And people have their own struggles within societies that are not necessarily welcoming of all of their identities. And I think many Palestinians with queer identities would say they might feel hesitant to foreground that when really that the survival of the community overall is at risk, and that they would never want their story of, maybe not being able to be openly queer with their family or their community to be a reason for people to then support or say, well then, like how we like to liberate the women of Iran by killing 150 schoolgirls. It's backwards logic, right? And so it's a really sensitive dynamic. One place that I would direct you toward, there's a magazine called My Cali, which is run by a Palestinian gay man who I know very well, and some of their articles are kind of about the art, but a lot of them are about identity and politics and kind of this and decolonizing identity, and they have a lot of really interesting stuff, mostly by Arab writers who are somewhere on the spectrum of different gender and sexual identities. I can share that with you afterward if you want. Does anyone else want to say something?
Just that, like Indy was saying, we had such a packed trip, and that was a piece of feedback that I definitely felt as a queer person myself, that I wanted some more of those experiences, and something I'm really looking forward, whenever the next time I get to go back to Palestine, I'm hoping to lead a delegation in the next, however long. And that's something I'd love to explore more. So as I learn, I would be happy to share those resources. And if you hear of any, let me know. Great.
One really cool resource, you might have seen it before, it's called Queering the Map. Yes. Have you seen that? Yeah. Is that what you're going to say back there? Yeah, so it's incredible. I mean, queer and trans folks, post to it. And it was one modality of like so harshly bringing home the reality of the genocide in Gaza was queer folks posting to that map during the genocide and writing to their partners that had been killed by Israel. And so but it's not just that. It's not just pain. It's not just horror. It's like also beautiful love letters and poems written between queer people in this part of the map that people don't often recognize, as a home for queer and trans people.
Thank you so much, everyone. I wish that we could talk forever, and the conversation can continue. For now, I just wanted to point out a couple. I'm going to move out of the way of some of these resources and actually come over here so I don't cause any microphone issues. So one thing is there may be more delegations coming up to Palestine in the future with UU people. And if that's something you would be interested in learning more about, I would love to collect your email address. And one way we can do that is if you sign in at the iPad that you may have seen when you came in. I didn't catch all of you. I also didn't want to hold us up too much, but on your way out, it would be great if you could add your email address. We're not going to add you to our list or anything unless you ask us to. It'll just be for things that come out of this event. And then there are some other resources here that to learn more, but also to, if you feel like you really are moved to donate some money to people who need it right now. Eyewitness Silwan is doing some of that amazing work, putting the eyes up in that neighborhood and also just sharing information about the displacements that are happening there. They're a really lovely community organization. There's an association called El Rawad, they're both like a cultural theater and dance organization in Aida refugee camp, but when the young woman who presented to us from that organization listed their activities, I think she went on for 20 minutes just listing their activities. There's nothing they don't do, including door-to-door bringing meals to people during Ramadan, and doing everything they do in an incredibly dignified and forward way. I would love to support them. Learning more about Sabeel, I think they're a great resource, especially if you have people in your kind of Christian communities who feel they've maybe been receiving only the Zionist narrative. Sabeel, they are Palestinian Christians. They're Christians from the Holy Land. You can't get any closer to the source, and they are incredibly thoughtful, diligent liberation theologists who are mind-blowingly dedicated. So yes, thanks again. And is that everything? Yes, UJME, who's also doing that work within our denomination. Oops. Yeah, there's a J in that website. Yeah, thank you again, and have a great night.